All right, welcome everybody to today's webinar. I'm Steve Mahoney. I'm with Kathleen Thompson. We're mentors with the Greater Hartford chapter of SCORE. Tonight's session is all about using Excel for your business. This is part one of a two-part series we're doing. Part two is going to be later this week. So for the first part for tonight's session, where we're going to start with is just kind of go through some of the introductions of Excel. I'm going to do a demo tonight and walk you through some of the basics, and then we're going to dive into creating some spreadsheets and figuring out some of the basic functionality. And then in part two, we're going to go a little bit deeper and do some more of the complex things that you want to use for Excel and using it for your business. So let's just start with a quick overview and getting to know Excel. And I saw that some of the folks in our poll are kind of on the newer side of this. Excel is a spreadsheet tool. It's part of the Microsoft Office suite. You've heard of Microsoft Word and Microsoft PowerPoint. They're all part of that Office suite. You may have also heard of Google Sheets, and you may use Google Sheets. That is Google's version of a spreadsheet tool. I would say that I use both tools. I have a lot more experience with Excel, so my default is to kind of use that, especially when I'm working with my SCORE clients. But I also use Google Sheets for other purposes. They're very similar, but they do have some differences. We're going to focus really on Excel tonight, but you'll find a lot of the basic functionality is very similar. So what are you trying to use Excel for? A lot of people think about it, it's using for financial information or organizing data. There's a lot of different examples that we're going to go through tonight, but Excel is basically organized into rows and columns, a grid of a spreadsheet with many rows, many columns. There's not really a limit in terms of how much data you can put into this, at least for practical purposes. Here's some examples that I've got on the slide here where you can see what people typically use Excel for. I would say probably the more common one is financial. So this could be where you're trying to look at your financial results, maybe your financial statements. Maybe you download your financial reports out of QuickBooks or another financial software and look at your income statement or your balance sheet or your cash flow. A lot of people will use Excel for budgets or creating a pricing model. It's a very flexible tool that we'll talk through in tonight's session and in our second part, where you have so much flexibility in terms of how you organize information and what you can do with that information. But it's not just for financial use. A lot of people will use it for sales and marketing tools. Let's say you want to have a list of all your customers, and maybe you want to have a bunch of data about what industry they're in, where they're located, how big they are, how often they've purchased from you. Maybe you've got a number of different products and you want to understand your product listing. Maybe you've got it by SKU or by product type or product description. It can also be a great tool for operational purposes. So sometimes businesses will use Excel for documenting key performance metrics and tracking them, for managing projects, understanding where the project status is, or to even doing a risk assessment. There's some great aspects of Excel, things like conditional formatting, and different, formats that you can put in things, different formulas you can put into your Excel spreadsheets that can really help you manage your business. And we're going to go into some of that stuff tonight and a little bit more in part two. One of the things that I like to talk to my clients about when we're using Excel is it's one thing to put data into a spreadsheet, but the more important aspect, especially as you're running your business, is what are you going to do with that data? And I like to tell people, you want to take that data, turn the data into information, and then use that information to make decisions. So what are you going to do with the information? Like I said, it's one thing to just put the information in a spreadsheet, but then we're going to want to play around with it and analyze it and do something with it. So the company I used to work at, we used to have an expression that was, if you just give me the data, that's just giving me the what. I want you to tell me the so what and the now what. Don't just give me the data. Tell me, what does the data mean? So what? What is this data telling me? And then now what? What are you going to do with this information now that you've learned it? And how are you going to make some better business decisions going forward? So building your spreadsheet. So a couple key things that we're going to talk about tonight. And as I go through the demonstration in a little bit, you're going to see why some of these things are important. The great thing about Excel is that you can play around with it. And if you make a mistake, you can undo what you did. You can change it. You could start over if you want. You can create copies. So it really gives you a lot of flexibility and how you build it and how you want to manage changes to it. So one of the key things to think about when you're designing the format of your spreadsheet is, what are you using this for? What decision are you trying to make? So going back to that previous slide where I talked about the what, the so what, and the now what, saying to yourself, I need some information and I want to build a spreadsheet, but I I don't really know what I don't know yet. So ask yourself what you're trying to solve. What business decision are you trying to make? So I've given some examples here on this slide. Maybe you're trying to prove a hypothesis. Maybe you're saying to yourself, I feel like I should be making more money in my business. I look at my cash account, I look at my, credit activity, I look at my QuickBook reports, but I don't really know. I feel like I should be making more, but I don't really know why. Why aren't I making more money? Excel can be a great tool for that. Maybe you want to use it for business decisions. Maybe you're just starting out, or maybe you are expanding into a new product or service line and you say, I need to figure out how much to price my product or service for such that I know I'm going to make enough money to run my business and make enough money to live off my business, but I don't really know what that number is yet. Excel can be a great tool to figure that out. Or you could also just want to use it to gather and organize data, organize information for your business for the future. And let's say you want to have a list of all your products and you want to understand how much have I sold? How much do I sell it for per unit? How much does it cost me per unit? How much am I making on each product? Excel can be a great tool for that. So these are just some examples, but I encourage you as you're starting to use Excel is ask yourself, what's the purpose of what I'm trying to build here? What decision am I trying to make? And what do I want that outcome to be? So as you think about sourcing your data, this is an important aspect of this. Now, depending upon the tool you're using and how much data you're working with, you can source your data from a number of different sources. Sometimes if you're looking at your financial results and you want to say, I have my QuickBook reports, I want to just download all the data in Excel and play around with it and do some calculations. I'm just going to export the data from my financial software or maybe some customer data from my CRM tool. I'm just going to dump it into Excel and then I'm going to format it and play around with it and see what that means. You could also just manually input or copy and paste the information from another source. So that's another way you can get your data into Excel. Those are kind of the two basic ones, either importing in or just kind of like copying and paste it or typing it in yourself. The most important aspect is this last bullet on the right side here, and that's to ensure that the data integrity you have in your spreadsheet is solid. If you think about the old saying, garbage in, garbage out, this can be a big problem if you import a bunch of data and then you start doing some analysis around it and there's problems with the underlying information, could lead you to a bad business decision. A lot of times when I'm working with clients of mine, we may look at their budget or their pricing model. And if they've got something that they've worked up, I'll say, send it to me in advance. And I'm going to go into Excel before our meeting and just kind of do an overview, see how the data is organized, maybe check some quick subtotals, maybe try to check some quick calculations just to ensure that the data looks solid, because I don't want us to start making some decisions and some assumptions without, if there's a problem with the underlying data. So as you think about building things and where you're sourcing your data from, ensuring that data integrity is solid is really important. So, as you're thinking about going through this, you may be like, I know I need to figure this out. I know I need to figure that out. I need to do my pricing model, but I don't know how much cash flow I'm bringing in, or I don't know how much money I'm going to have in the bank in 6 months. And you think you got like 10 different things to do. My best advice I can give you is, start with the end in mind. If you don't know where you want to go, think about yourself, like, what do I want? Try to picture what you want this data to show you at the end. I'd really like to understand how much cash I'm bringing in every single month over the last 12 months and what those sources of cash are. How much revenue? What are my expenses? What's my owner's draw look like? Or I would really love to be able to see some scenario planning where if I increased or decreased the price of my product over a period of time, what would it do to my profitability for my total business? Asking yourself what that end point in mind is, sketch it out in your brain, sketch it out on a piece of paper, and then we used to have a joke at my business because we were all in the financial planning world. And we used to have a running joke that said, if you start to panic, keep calm and start a spreadsheet. So it was one of my favorite phrases. So we're going to jump right in. I'm going to switch over to Excel here, and I'm going to share with you an example spreadsheet. And then we're going to start going through some examples. And as I mentioned, if you have any questions as we're going through this, put them in the Q&A box. We're going to have plenty of time for questions, and we'd love to hear from you. So I've shared just a sample spreadsheet. We're going to go through a few examples here, and I'm going to kind of walk you through how to get oriented around Excel. I know we've got a few beginners and some moderate users on here just to get you oriented. The one thing I will say is that there is a ton of things you can do with this tool. We're not going to even approach the depth of it. What I'm going to try to cover tonight in our second session is probably the more common things that you're going to use and some of the quick tips that you'll be able to figure out, and probably some common business tools that that'll help you as you're thinking about running your business. So the first thing I want to do is we're going to go through an example of preparing just a spreadsheet to, I talked about different purposes. The first example is going to be one where we're going to just gather some data together, and it's just going to be a list of our products. And we want to see our products organized with a bunch of different variables attached to it. And one of the key things as you're thinking about building a spreadsheet is to determine what you want in the rows and what you want in the columns. And this is helpful as you think about maybe designing this on a piece of paper to think about how does that decision point at the end help inform what I want now, and how you're going to build it. So one of the things that you'll want to think through is as you think about the different variables you want to look at, in this example, I want to say, I want to see a product listing of all my products, and I want to see it organized by these categories. I've got what my product name is, what category of my product it is, when I first sold it, what my year-to-date sales are, how much I sell it for per unit, and how much it costs me per unit. And these are the 6 items that I want to see for all of my products. Well, in this example, as you're thinking about it, one of the tips that I give people is that the more variables you have should be in the rows. And what I mean by that is in this example, you've got 6 things that you want to look at for all of your products. You've probably got a lot more than 6 products. So the way we're going to build our spreadsheet is say, I'm going to have my products be in rows, and I'm going to have these variables in columns. And that's how I'm going to design it. You can always switch things in the future if you need to, but once you start building your rows and columns, if you start to picture what that data might look like, switching it afterwards can just take a little bit more time. But let's jump in and see what an example spreadsheet would look like. And first, I'm going to walk you through what the menu looks like. So this is just an example of some raw data for just a company I made up. It's a shoe company. I'll use it a few times throughout this class tonight. And before I jump into how we want to play around with the data, I wanted to walk you through the menu and just share with you how the Excel menu is organized. Now, one of the nice things about Excel is that there are a few different options of doing a lot of different tasks. So there are, you can copy something, a couple different ways. You can move stuff a couple different ways. So the first thing to talk about really is the toolbar at the top. You've got the most common items you'll probably use up here are file. This is where you're going to either open, close, save, or maybe print. That's where you're going to use this more often. Edit is another commonly used part of the toolbar. This is where you're going to cut, copy, paste, maybe delete or make modifications to your sheet. Insert is another common one where you're using Excel, where you're going to insert a cell, a row, a column, or maybe even a new spreadsheet. That's a commonly used one. Format is another one where you can format an individual cell, or you can make formatting chains for an entire row, column, or the spreadsheet itself. And then there's some other ones here. Tools and data are sometimes a little bit more common, but I would say file, edit, insert, and format are the ones we're going to focus on to start here. Now, that's just the toolbar at the very top of the Excel window. The other thing you have is this ribbon bar here. And if you see, there are these little submenus underneath here. There's the home one. This is the one that I would recommend you keep your selection on the most, because this has a lot of common tools that you can use. You can see cut, copy, paste. If you want to format your your font. The other nice thing about Excel is if you're trying to make changes to things, if you go up to one of these buttons and you just hover your cursor, you'll see that the word bold just popped up. And that tells you that little button there, if I selected that, it would make that font bold. So there's nice little tools here that you can use, and all of these buttons you can play around with and learn how they work. And then going across these other submenus, insert is one I wouldn't use that much, but home is probably the most common one. Draw and page layout are more common if you're using things like charts and graphs, which we're not going to go into right now. Formulas can be helpful if you're using some more sophisticated formulas. And then data can be a good one. We're going to get into sorting and filtering and using a large amount of data and big spreadsheets in part two. So we'll go through this a little bit more often in that class. Review is a nice submenu for your spell check if you want to just make sure there's no spelling errors in your Excel spreadsheet. And then view, this is a good one, especially when you're working with large amounts of data. This can just help you change how you're viewing the information on your screen. And we're going to go through that with some large spreadsheets, in another class, in the second class. But for instance, if you decide like, wow, my screen looks really small, in the view tab under this zoom, you can make it, either smaller or bigger if you wanted to. And just to point out how Excel allows you to do things in multiple different locations, I could also make the size of the screen bigger or smaller down here. So my advice to people when they're going to Excel is to kind of just play around with it a bit and see what the different options are and see what the different buttons do. You can't really make a fatal mistake in your Excel spreadsheet because of one important button in Excel, and that is the undo button. So this is the little, backwards arrow here. And this is the undo button. You can also get there by going to edit, undo. And what this basically does is it undoes the last action you did. And you can keep going back and undoing previous things you've done. And that way, if you've realized you've made like a fatal mistake in your spreadsheet, you can just keep clicking undo until you've, kind of fixed what you did and then kind of do things a little bit different way. So my best advice for folks is to kind of go around and play around with it. And you're going to learn a lot as you can kind of see what different aspects there are in Excel. So we're going to start with some of the basics and just in terms of formatting the information. So what I've downloaded here is this is the example where we're just going to gather a lot of product information for our products for our shoe company. The first thing you'll notice is that, some of these columns, I've got my 6 columns here. I've got my product name, my category, the date of first sale, my year-to-date sales, my price per unit, and my cost per unit. And you may notice that some of these words are cut off, like date of first sale, you can't read the whole thing. Some of these descriptions, you can't read the whole thing. And that's because the columns aren't wide enough. Very common issue in Excel when you import data or copy and paste data in is you can't see everything. So a couple quick tools a quick step you can do to fix your column width. If you go up in between the 2 columns, you see this little crossbar comes up. If you click on your mouse and then you can drag this way and it widens the column. I can do the same thing for this one if I want. I could also, if I wanted to do all of them at once, I could just go up to the first, mark the entire column. I can drag my mouse over and I've now marked all 6 columns. And if I just do this, it has now created all 6 columns to be the same width. The other nice thing that they have in Excel, which you can do, is if you want to just auto fix the width, if you mark all your columns and you double click on that crossbar, it will make each column the exact width needed to fit the data that's in there. So that's just a nice little tool that if you had all that information organized, and let's say I open up my spreadsheet and I'm going to undo everything. And this is how it looked when I opened up. If I said, wow, this is all crowded, I'm just going to go mark on my columns, double click, and now everything is as wide as it needs to be and I can read it. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is formatting your data. So the first thing you may notice in this column that says data first sale is these formats are all different. This one says 12-Jan. This one says 6/6-5. This one says 9/22. A lot of times when you're looking at a lot of information, you want the data to be consistently formatted so that you can quickly analyze what it says instead of having to have your brain rethink and recalibrate the format of the cell that's there. So one thing you can do is you can format the cells. So that step is we're going to mark all these columns right here. Again, just click on the first one, drag your mouse down. And then we're going to go up to format cells. And this box pops up. And this gives you the option to format any data that you have in a number of different ways. So the one that we're going to look at here is called date. And if I click on date, this gives me the different types of date formats. If I wanted the day of the week spelled out with the month and the year, the full date, I could do it that way. If I wanted it like the European format, if I wanted it with the year first, you could have a bunch of different options. I kind of like this one because it has month, year, or the month, the day, then the year to the calendar year. And if I click OK, now you can see that all of my dates in every row are formatted the same way. Again, quick to easy, analyze because all the numbers are consistently presented. So now we're going to do that with our financial information. So in this column, you can see I've got my year-to-date sales. And it's funny, when I go through things like this with my clients, if I get a spreadsheet that looks like this, the first thing I say to them is, do you mind if I format the numbers? And that's because, when you're trying to analyze what's going on with the numbers, there's two issues with the way this data is presented. One is there's no commas. So the 1800 and the 2200.6 and the 2000, it just doesn't, your brain has to think a little bit more to separate out, the commas versus the regular numbers. And the other is some of these cells have pennies and some of them don't. The 2200.6 doesn't even have the zero after it. So I'm going to make these all consistent. So I'm going to go in here again. I'm going to go to format cells. And now I'm going to go, I have a number of different options here. I can go to number. This one will let me present negative numbers with a dash. I can do negative numbers with a parenthesis. I could have 2 decimal places. I could have 0 decimal places. I could have negative numbers being red. So this just tells you kind of what your options are. So I'm going to select this one. And now I've got all my numbers formatted the same way. And you can see that they all line up. And actually, these ones don't even have the commas in them. So I'm going to say, well, I don't really like that one either because I want some commas. You can also go to the accounting function. You can go to the currency function. So a lot of different options here. One of the shortcuts that's in Excel is this little toolbar up here. There's this comma button, which allows you to pick the comma style formatting. So if I select that one, now you can see I put the commas in. It's just another different option. Another button that's up here is if you decide I don't really need to see the pennies because it's my year-to-date sales. Pennies don't really matter to me. It's just going to clog up the spreadsheet. You can increase or decrease the number of decimals. So here I'm going to decrease the decimals. And yeah, I do have cents in this one that was 120.75, but it's rounded it to 121 for how it presents it. And that's fine enough for me. Now, when I get to my price per unit, my unit cost, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to format these. I'm going to decide I'm going to keep the pennies in because maybe that's more meaningful as I think about unit cost. One last thing to show on the formatting, I decided that I want a little bit more white space between some of the columns. Maybe I'm going to make these first two a little bit wider. You can also format the text to be either left, center, or right. Based on these options right up here. And again, if you just hover over the button, it'll pop up and say align right. So if I say, well, maybe this will look better if I just align it to the right instead of the left. I don't really like that. I'm going to put it back to be left. So that's just a way to play around with your data, especially if it comes in a messy format. Just gets things aligned and clean. And as you can see, kind of everything's lined up nicely. That allows you to quickly more analyze it and look at things. So next, we're going to talk about trying to use data for analysis and using a spreadsheet and building something that we're going to use for analysis. And this is going to be a cash flow budget or a cash flow results summary. It's going to be an example we're going to do. So let's say you're thinking to yourself, I want to understand what's going on with my business, how much revenue and expenses are coming in, how much I'm paying myself, my bank for my debt. And I just want to see my cash flow on a spreadsheet. And I just want to understand it and play around with it and analyze it a little bit. So here again, you're going to determine the rows and columns you want. And again, the dimension that has the more variables should be the rows. You're going to ask yourself, like, what do I want those rows and columns to be? And ask yourself, what am I trying to build? Well, if I want to understand my cash flow and what's coming in over what period of time, let's put in some rows that I think I want to export maybe from QuickBooks or from my bank statements or my credit card statements. I said, well, I want to see my sales broken out between products and services. I want to see my cost of goods sold. And then I want to see my expenses between rent, payroll, insurance, utilities, and then whatever else I have. I don't know how many there are, but there's other categories. So in this example, you're going to probably have a fair number of rows. And if you want to use this to see a trend of your cash flow activity over time, or maybe use it to help budget, generally, financial reports show periods of time in columns, whether it's by month or by annual period. So, the recommendation here would be financial results show categories down the side and periods of time in columns. So I'm going to build my spreadsheet the same way. So here we've got a sample of information. And so as you look at this, this is, I've got my data organized. My column widths are fine. I can read everything. I've formatted my numbers so that they're all lined up, left align, easy to read, what's biggest, what's smallest. I've got my negative numbers in parentheses so I can quickly see that they're negative. You can also use the minus sign in Excel to denote negative numbers. I find the parentheses work better because they're easier to see. Sometimes you may miss that a number is a minus number, is if it's got a minus sign in front of it, the parentheses are quickly easy to see. So now we're going to say to ourselves, all right, well, we got all this information. What do we want to do with it? So the first thing we're going to do is say, well, I've got 5 months of information here. What does it look like for the full year? So I'm going to add in a column here. And if you want to insert a column or insert a row, you can, mark the row that you're in. You can go into insert column right there. You can also click over here, the insert button. If you click on that, it gives you an option to insert a column. Again, multiple different ways of doing things. And let's say I want this cell to represent my year-to-date results. So I'm going to just start typing in the cell year-to-date. And when you start typing, it'll either show up in the cell itself here, but it also shows up here in this toolbar. You can edit it in either place. You can click up here and edit it, or you can just go in here and start typing. So now we're going to put a formula in. So one of the more common formulas used in Excel is called the sum function. And what that's going to do is add up everything within range of the formula in which you've created. Every time you do a formula in Excel, the first character you put in is the equal sign. So we're going to start in with equals. I'm going to start typing in sum. And if you notice, as I started typing, what pops up is Excel is going to give you some recommendations based on the first couple letters you type in. It's going to prompt you with, excuse me, the most recently used one. So sum is the most recently used one I've done. And then when you're trying to capture a range of cells, you're going to put it in a parentheses. Because that basically says surrounding these parentheses are the cells that I want to add up. So then what you do is you pick your beginning cell, and you can see that it started that dotted line, it started to come in. And then I'm just going to mark all of these cells. I'm going to type in my closed parentheses. Now you can see that formula says, give me the sum of everything between B4 and F4. So I've typed that in, and now that's created that formula. Now, one way to see if your formula is correct is if you double click on this cell, it's going to highlight the cells that it's captured. So that's just a way for you to quickly say, yeah, I captured everything. So you can add that in. And then if you say to yourself, all right, well, I want the same formula in for all of these rows so I can see year to date for all my revenue and all my expenses, you don't need to type in equal sum, and mark every single cell for every row. You can use what's called the copy and paste function. So what copy and paste does is it basically says, take whatever formula is in the cell that I am referring to and copy it into the cell that I'm going to paste in. A couple different ways you can do this. The first is you can go up to the edit toolbar and you can select copy. Now, when you do that, if you notice, there's dotted lines moving around the cell. This means that you've activated the copy function. And if you select the next cell that you want it to go with, and if you go to edit, paste, it's now captured up the next row of information. And you can see that it's now picking up that row. The numbers are coincidentally the same. It's just a coincidence that the exact same number, but it is picking up the right cells. So now what you want to do is you say to yourself, okay, and if I don't have to copy each individual one every single time, I can actually copy all of them at once. So you can do edit copy, select your target that you want to paste to, then you can just mark all of these cells, go to edit paste, and there you've got all of your formula that's come in. So that's a quick way to add in a year-to-date summary for all of this, for all of your rows at once. The next thing you may want to say to yourself is well, I'd like to be able to have a subtotal of all my revenue because I've just got this wall of data. I've got revenue and all my expenses. Why don't I see what my total revenue is? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a row. So we're going to mark that first column there. We're going to go to insert rows. The other thing you can do is you can right click on the cell and you can see a little pop-up box comes up and I can just click insert there. Again, Excel gives you a number of different options of doing things. Now I'm going to put a sum formula in for the items that are above this. Now, I'm going to type in my equals sum. So now I'm summing everything in this cell here. I can double check that that's working okay. Now I'm going to copy and paste this going across. Now, one thing that you can do in Excel, besides going to the menu at the top, is you can use what are called keyboard shortcuts. Now, I'm using a Mac for my computer. Mac and Windows keyboard shortcuts are a little different. But if you go up to the toolbar up here, you'll see that under Edit, it says if I want to copy, next to copy, you see it says Command C. So what that means is if I select Command C on my keyboard, it's created the copy function. Now, if I go up here and I see that paste is Command V, I can go just mark all these cells here. And if I select Command V, it's pasted it in there. So again, number of different ways to get there, whatever works best for you. You'll find if you're creating spreadsheets quickly and you want to put some formulas in, it might be faster while your hands are on the keyboard to do Command C, Command V, instead of taking your mouse away and going up to the edit bar and doing it that way. So now we've got a revenue summary. We've got our total revenue in here. And let's say I want to put in what my total expenses are here. So I've got all my expense categories. Let's put something in before income taxes, just so I can see what my expenses are. I'm going to insert a couple rows here. And then I'll put my expense formula in. I'm going to copy and paste that over. So now I've got my expenses. But maybe I should put a label on this so I know what it says. So I'm going to put total revenue here. I'm just going to type this into the cell, and you can see I'm typing it here and it shows up here. And I'm going to put total expenses. Another thing you can do to help bring your eye to subtotals, especially in financial exhibits, so that you can quickly go to the total, is you can use the indent function up here. Again, a nice little button that you can use, increase indent. You can click that a couple times. It just increases the text. Again, so as you jump into your spreadsheet, you can quickly go to that subtotal. Another way you can quickly go to a subtotal, a lot of financial exhibits use underlines. There's a nice border button that Excel uses. A lot of times in financial exhibits, right before a subtotal, there'll be a line above it. You click over here, gives you all sorts of different borders you can put in your cells. So here I can see that I've added in a nice line. So again, you open up your spreadsheet, quickly go to what's my total revenue. You can go here. You don't have to search through and look at formulas and things like that. Your eyes will naturally gravitate towards that, allows you to quickly look at the information. So the next thing you may want to ask yourself is well, I've got my total expenses, I've got my total revenue. What's my total cash flow? So I'm going to just put in a row here called net cash flow. And I want to add up everything that's my cash flow because it's got all my revenue and it's got all my expenses. And that's what it's going to be. And I copy and paste it over. Well, I just realized I made a problem. I made an error because when I look at my formula, my net cash flow is picking up everything in this cell. I mean, everything in this row of cells, this column here. However, I've put a subtotal in for my revenue and I put a subtotal in for my expenses. So in reality, what Excel is doing is it's double counting all of my revenue and expenses because it's picked up not only these 4 cells, but it's also picked up the sum of them. So it's double counted them. So as you're thinking about building analysis and spreadsheets, make sure you understand how your data is organized. So if you say like, all right, well, how am I going to fix this? Well, it's easy. What are you really trying to add up? You're trying to add up your revenue. So I'm going to go up and mark that cell, and I'm going to add in the plus sign. I'm going to add up my expenses, add in another plus sign, and then I want the sum of these 3 numbers at the bottom. And that's my true total for my cash flow. And again, you can double click on this and it'll see that it'll highlighted which cells you've picked up. That one, and these 3. So now I'm going to copy and paste this over. And now you can see that now I've got my true cash flow and how it's going to work. So another thing that you could, as you're going through this, you could say to yourself, well, maybe I don't really need that total expense line. Maybe it's just kind of extra and it's not really necessary. So I'm just going to delete that row. So I'm going to go delete the row. Now you get a formula error at the bottom. See this hashtag ref? This means you've got a reference error in your spreadsheet. And if you look at the formula here, you can say, well, what's going on here? Well, if I look in the formula itself, it's picking up cell B8. it's picking up these down here, and then it's picking up a reference. Excel is now looking for that row and that cell you deleted. So because of that, it's now not calculating. It's not working. So if you start to see a reference error and you see something that maybe broke, go to your undo button. And now it just put that expense line back in. And then you can go ahead and adjust the formula as you need to. So that's a benefit of the undo function is if you see that reference error, that just means that there's a formula error in how something got created. So that's just an example. Again, we formatted all the information at first. Now we're going to start manipulating it and putting in some formulas, starting to do some of that analysis to make some decisions. So the next example we're going to go through is around a pricing model. So let's say you're saying to yourself, I want to figure out how much I should price my product for and how much it's going to cost, how much money I'm going to make, total revenue, total profit, in total and by unit. What do I want this to do? So again, you start to determine what rows and columns you think you want to have. So you're going to say to yourself, all right, I'm going to put in my product name. And I know that I'm going to use my shoe company example. My revenue and my profit is going to be determined by how many shoes I sell per month. So how many products did I sell per month? How much am I selling each one for? How much does each one cost for me to buy or manufacture? And then how much is the product? How much is the profitability, by product and in total? So as you think about building this out, you're going to say to yourself, well, if I'm doing a pricing model, maybe I can use this as a budget tool. Maybe I can use this kind of similar to how we did that cash flow. So let me have the pricing model being my rows and my kind of budget and pricing and projections could be columns similar to how I did my cash flow analysis. So I've created a sample one here, and just kind of created the template for it. And we'll start to fill in some numbers here. So again, you're going to want to determine the variables to include here. So you can see that I've started to build out, all right, how am I going to calculate my revenue? How am I going to calculate my profit? And as you're building this out, you're going to kind of logically think through what the variables are and what the inputs are. Now, if you're using Excel for pricing, one thing that I highly recommend you do is thinking about how your products or services are bundled to price. But what I mean by that is I'm going to use my shoe company as an example to continue the thread. So in this first example, I've got men's shoes. Now, regardless if I've got them in, brown or black or burgundy, whatever color they are, they're still men's shoes. They all cost the same for me to acquire. They all sell for the same price. Doesn't matter how much I sell of each kind. I'm going to price my product based on that one. So try to pick things that are of like kind in nature, whether it's a package of services that you offer. Maybe you have like a base, deluxe, and premium different services that you offer. Maybe price those individually because they've got differentiated price points. Or again, if you've got products, thinking about bundles of products. The reason that's important is you want to make your pricing model manageable. And if you try to do too many versions of this for all of your products or all of your services, it might just become too cumbersome to be manageable and helpful. So in my example here, I'm going to say, all right, well, let's start building out what my pricing model is going to be. So let's say I sell my shoes for $200 a shoe. And I'm going to pretend that I'm estimating I'm going to sell 8 of them a month. My revenue is going to be 200 times 8. When you're doing the multiplication in Excel, you use the asterisk button, which is above the 8. You do, 200 times $8, and that gives you your $1,600 of revenue. Now I've done my cost analysis, and my shoes cost $110 to acquire or manufacture. And I know I'm going to sell 8 in the month. So my cost of goods sold are going to be 110 times 8. Now, one thing you can do to make this a little easier on yourself is you can use what are called reference formulas. So when you think about a pricing model or a cash flow forecast, the amount of revenue and the amount of cost of goods sold related to how many shoes you sell per month are going to be the same. So one thing you could do is you could, instead of hard coding in 8, instead of typing in 8, you could make this cell equal to this cell. So what that does is if you decide when you're rethinking your model, if you say, well, maybe I'll sell 10 shoes this month instead of 8. When you change the sales to 10, the cost of sales automatically changes to 10 because the Excel formula is referencing this one up here. This is just an extra step. It saves you that extra step, and it also ensures that your data integrity is right. You know that the number of shoes you've sold, you've got the same assumption for revenue and cost of goods sold. So let's change this back to 8 for our example. Now, if you say to yourself, how much did I make per shoe? Because you want to understand your unit cost. That's an important factor when a retailer or manufacturer are looking at their products. So in this example, I'm going to take my 200. I'm going to subtract it from my 110. I'm making $90 per shoe. If I want to know how much that is on a percentage basis, I'm going to take that 90 and I'm going to divide it by the sales price. That's a 45% margin. I formatted this to be the percentage sign. If for some reason it formatted to be that, you can use this percentage button up here. And the percentage button, like the number function, allows you to increase or decrease the decimals however you want. And then if you want to see your total profit on a dollar basis, you can basically take your revenue minus your expenses, minus your cost of goods sold. And that tells you made $720 in revenue. So, one thing you can do is you can say, all right, I'm gonna cut and paste this over, and I'm gonna copy this, and I'm gonna use my copy paste function. And now I've got this for every single month of the year. I could even do a year to date where I could sum all of these. I'm gonna sum how much revenue I'm gonna bring in. I'm gonna sum how many shoes I need to sell. And I'm gonna sum up my total profit. And this tells me, okay, if I sell 8 shoes per month, I'm going to sell 48 shoes over the course of 6 months and make $9,600. Again, 5,280 of cost of goods sold, and my profitability will be 4,320. As you go through this, one thing you can do is you can say, well, maybe I'm going to assume my sales are going to increase each month. So if I say maybe I'll sell 10 in month 1 and 12 and then 13 and 15 and 18, you can say, okay, great. Now I'm starting to see my revenue and my cost of goods sold go up. And you can notice that the cost item has also adjusted. So as I adjusted the 13 shoes in the revenue section, it updated down in the cost of goods sold section. So one thing you may notice is that I've got these number signs here, these pound signs, these hashtags. Like, what does that mean? That's just Excel telling you that the number that is in there is wider than the column width that you have. Easy way to fix that. Double click, it widens it up. The other thing you could do, you can get rid of the pennies if you want. Just to make it a little easier to read. One other thing that you can do in terms of the reference point is if you wanted to use this and play around with different sales prices and say, well, if I change my sales price, what would it be? What would that do to my profitability? Now, if I change this to say $225, you'll notice that this month changed, but February didn't because this still says 200. So one of the things you can do, much like we did the cost of goods sold item down here, is you can use what's called a reference formula. And you can say, I'm going to make my February sales price the same as January, and I'm just going to copy that all the way over. And what that now says is, anytime I change the January one, every single month changes because it's anchored to that. So these are good steps to do if you want to use this kind of tool and create some shortcuts. Just be cognizant of how you've set your spreadsheet up so that you know where you're using those reference formulas and how they're going to impact what your analysis looks like. The other thing you can say to yourself is like, what's happening with my profit margin per shoe? Well, maybe you start out with, a $200 price point because you want to bring some customers in, but maybe by month 3, you want to increase it to 225, and then you can see that it's still on 225 going forward. So this is just different ways that you can play around with Excel and use some kind of conditional thought process and use the analysis. One of the things we're going to go through in the next class is how to thinking about a tool like this using multiple different scenarios, and then you can kind of compare and contrast what they might look like. And that'll be kind of copying and pasting large blocks of data and not just individual cells. So there was a lot there that we just went through in like half an hour, 40 minutes. I want to pause here and we're going to go through some questions because that's all we've got for the demo tonight. And I'll be happy to go through anything else that I've covered so far or kind of redo and answer any questions that folks have. So feel free to chime in with any questions. There's a Q&A box down at the bottom and put your questions in there and Kathleen will go through those. Kathleen, do we have anything yet?
No, we don't.
Okay. Anything you can think of that I should have covered so far that I should go back and do a little more slowly?
There were a couple of things, but then you did them
Okay. All right.
later. So that I was making note of, but then you went ahead and did it later.
Okay, good. Well, while we're waiting for any other questions, let's talk about what we're going to cover on Thursday. So, um, we're going to go through more kind of formulas you can create to analyze your data. Today, I just went through kind of the basics, right? Add, subtract, divide, multiply, percentages, kind of the sum function. We're going to go into some more stuff. We're going to go into kind of copying similar formulas and some tips for that. I've downloaded some example spreadsheets from online. We're just going to talk about managing large spreadsheets and lots of data, not just simple ones. We're going to talk about pivot tables, sorting and filtering on data, conditional formatting, which is a great tool to help you quickly see things on a red, yellow, green stoplight basis, and also the search function, which is a neat one to find information quickly. So that's coming attractions. But let's talk about any other questions folks have tonight.
I had one comment I wanted to make when you talked about bad data. A lot of times if you're using large data and you're copying and pasting, you want to be careful that you're starting with the same column every time, because if your cursor has gotten off, especially if you have a lot of columns, it's really easy to start your data in not the same column that you started the other data, because I've done it. So in other words,
It's funny.
if you started your data in column A and it goes for 20 columns, and then you copy and paste data from somewhere else that's the same, and you don't start it in column A, you start it in column C, all of a sudden the data is in the wrong place. And you can undo it, but you have to notice it. And if you've done any analysis on it later or any sorting or filtering, it becomes really difficult to fix it later. So
Yeah.
it's definitely something, you know how they say measure twice, cut once when you're building things? This is kind of the same way with Excel. You want to make sure you're putting the data in the right place. And also, if it's not in the exact same format, you want to either get it in the same format before you import it, or import it to a different spot and fix it
And then move it in.
and then move it in. Because if you have 20 columns of data from one source and 15 columns of data from another source, and it's not the first 15, you want to make sure that the comparable data lines up, because otherwise you have a mess on your hand.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. The the measure twice, cut once analogy is a great one. I find myself if I feel like I'm doing something complicated, I'm like, I think I know what I'm doing. I'll move it over, and then before I do anything else, I'm like, let me just make sure this worked. That way, if I need to undo it, I need to only undo it once. The nice thing about undo is that you can keep undoing, the last few functions you've done. But the other problem is if you did something wrong and then you did three other steps and then you discovered that the step 4 steps ago was wrong, you got to undo all four of them to get back to that last one. And then you've got to redo the work you just did. So whenever you're moving things around a lot or working with large chunks of data or lots of formulas and stuff, just until you get the hang of things, just be careful as you're going through it. And if you're working with small data sets, sometimes you can kind of eyeball test it and be like, wait a minute, that doesn't look right. I'm looking at these 5 numbers. That doesn't add up to 10 million. That adds up to like 100,000. Something must be wrong. So a lot of times you can kind of use that sanity check as you're going through certain things. Do we want to launch our
Could you
mentor
show
poll?
people how to copy their worksheet to another one to save a copy before they do anything in case they mess the whole thing up?
Yes. Why don't I go through that in the next class? That way
Okay.
I'll go through that as a let me make a note of that one.
Mm-hmm.
The other the other good point on that one is kind of like that's around the same concept of version control, where if you're going in and making radical changes to something, just save the previous version with a date. So I'll go through that one in Thursday's class. Do we want to go through do our mentor poll? Because I know we've got about 5 minutes left in case we have any other questions. So Kathleen's going to launch a second poll. If you are interested in working with a SCORE mentor, if you are not already, just answer tonight's poll real quickly. You will get an email from me giving you instructions on how to get a mentor and the steps you can take. That is the only email you'll get from me. You're not going to get bombarded with spam emails. If you don't feel like doing that, you can go to score.org and just go to the Find a Mentor section. But I can also give you some more tips on that if you're interested in working with a mentor, if you're not already doing that. You can just answer that poll for tonight. Any other questions or ideas for our next session that folks want to learn about? All right, great. I'm just looking at the previous ones. We've got some questions on pivot tables and sorting. Yes, we're going to do that. All right, excellent. Right. So we do a last call for questions. We are coming up on the top of the hour here. Do we see somebody who's raised their hand? Cedric, if you have a question, you can type it in the Q&A box. That's the best way to ask your question in a format like this one. Again, that poll is still open. If you'd like to work with a SCORE mentor, we will tell you how to do that. All right, the invite for Thursday. You can, if you haven't registered for Thursday's class, you can do so at our website. You will also get a link for that tomorrow. You do need to register for Thursday's class. And when you register for that, you will receive a link for it. All right. Well, I think we could probably wrap it up there. I'm not seeing any other questions come in. Why don't we go ahead and end the poll? Thank you, everyone, for responding to that. I want to thank everybody for joining tonight. Again, if you're interested in learning more about SCORE, you can do so at score.org. If you're interested in learning about all the other webinars that we have, you can go to our YouTube channel. Just search for SCORE Greater Hartford. You can watch recordings of other webinars we've done on a wide variety of topics, including finance, marketing, sales. We've got our startup school series there, a lot of great different topics there. And while you're there, you can actually subscribe to new video, subscribe to the channel, and you'll be notified of new videos as they are posted. So with that, unless there are any further questions, I think we could probably stop the recording and thank everybody for coming. So thanks a lot, everybody.